Previous on the show, we've looked at public sentiment towards various South African industries, from airlines to banking, from telecoms to insurance. But what if one were to compare sentiment across the continent? How do customers respond to the telecoms brands in Kenya, Nigeria and South Africa? Are there similarities in compliments or complaints? Today we have JP Kloppers, who's the Chief Executive of BrandsEye, to take us through some of the data. JP, good to have you with us.
Great.
So what are some of the major themes that are coming through when it comes to telecoms?
I think when we look at the telecoms industry across the three countries, I think what becomes clear in the kind of reasons why people like or dislike the brands throughout Africa is that South Africa seems to be more mature in people's responses. Some would say more immature, but we'll look at that in a minute. But just on the whole, if we look at kind of the macro view and just focusing on the customer service, if we look at the first chart, that South Africa gets the lowest amount of net sentiment when it looks at that.
Here we are, there's the chart, JP.
When we compare it. So it's minus 66% net negative sentiment. So South African consumers are generally more negative towards telcos than in the other countries. Nigeria getting the most positive, if you like. You'll see the net negative sentiment still negative across all the industries. And I think that's the telco space. Because people generally don't go onto social media to say, hey, I really love my telco. They go onto social media to complain when they need something to be fixed. But if we look at the second chart, which is around which brands are doing particularly well in this space, I think that's where it gets interesting. So on this chart, we've got Etisalat in Nigeria, Orange in Kenya. And for both of them, the things that they're doing well is just it's providing good network coverage and good data. Whereas with Cell C, the reason they do well, the theme that comes through in South Africa is good customer service. And on the negative side, it's actually very similar. So if we look at the brands that are doing the worst in each of the categories, again, it's in Nigeria and Kenya, it's data quality and network coverage. So here we've got Glow Mobile in Nigeria and Safaricom in Kenya. And Safaricom in particular, the reason people complain is because they can't get access to M-Pesa, which we know they all use. And the reason they love Orange in Kenya is because of the cheap feature phones that the network puts out. So it's kind of a lower bar, if you like, from the customers and what they expect. But in South Africa, it's almost like that expectation bar is higher. And we've spoken about that before, the sort of expectation promise mismatch. So when a brand promises X, and then the company comes in and delivers kind of a substandard product, that gap is often what we see reflected in the negative conversation on social media. So for a telecom, for example, they're often right at the bottom, but it's not a fair competition, because when customers expect good customer service, and you're dealing with a fixed line operator, it's harder for them to fix each individual item because they actually have to dispense people, whereas for a mobile operator, the technical issues are somewhat easier to fix in kind of the macro scale, because you're not having to actually go and put physically cables down to people's houses. It's just making sure your base stations are right.
Is it possible to tell overall which is the best company, or are the local issues so diverse that you can't actually get an overall winner?
Well, I think because of this kind of expectation gap, I don't think it would be fair to try and compare one against the other, because a brand in Kenya would be promising a certain amount of service, and a brand in South Africa, I think because it's maybe more competitive, brands are always trying to up the ante in what they're promising customers, and so the expectations naturally get higher, and if they can't fulfill that, you get the kinds of complaints that we see. Cell C, the reason they're good is they manage to turn that around successfully often, and Telkom doing better and better. I think the interesting ones are the ones in the middle. Vodacom and MTN are not far off Telkom's negative value. They're almost a close second and third, but on the negative side, with Cell C being quite far ahead.
Yep. Well, on the trend tracker, hashtag fees must fall continues to make headlines this week. Protests have continued across campuses in the country. So, JP, we've had fascinating discussions about political commentary. What are we finding out here? Today we heard that WITS had to cancel its General Assembly.
Well, I mean, the university officials didn't attend, but everybody else did. The kind of meetings continued, and so we listened to some of those talks. I think what we've seen here, the conversation's quite focused between WITS and UCT at the moment. Obviously, a lot went down in UKZN today with the police again firing rubber bullets and stun grenades. 4 students got arrested. But it seems like Wits is the hotbed of the conversation. And what's interesting to me is the conversation's 10 times smaller than it was last year. So last year we were seeing 118,000 average mentions a day. Now it's around 20,000 a day. It was a bit higher at the beginning of the week, but today we're sitting on 13,000 at the moment, when I checked kind of 10 minutes ago. And what I find quite fascinating about it is trying to separate out the conversation. Is quite hard on social media, and I think what we're seeing is kind of racial tensions rising on social media, because social media, like, as you know, it's an echo chamber to a large degree. You hear what your type of people say, and so when one person shares a racist video, it suddenly becomes kind of big in your mind, but actually in the grand scheme of things, that's not a big theme. And I think where we need to be careful, and this is a good platform for it, is just to say, hey, let's try and get to the root cause here, which is students wanting free education, students wanting to finish their studies, universities wanting to just run the operation and do their jobs well, and an absent government. Yeah. I think if anything, that what we've seen this week, it's really the government not taking part at all. And that would be, for me, is the big question which emerged out of the social media data, is where is the government in all of this this week?
I hope that they hear these calls, JP. Thank you so much for your time. That was JP Kloppers, who's the CEO of BrandsEye.